Joining me, everybody. What we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to try to do this as a working session. What I mean by that is I'm going to pop around with a few materials because I want to just show you what we're talking about. We had a lot of conversations in the spring about solutions for the severe cash crunch that this pandemic had on everyone, including healthcare providers. And I think we all know that there was significant impact to your offices, even though perhaps the public doesn't understand how that could be the case, that healthcare providers also suffered. But many of you were closed for a good period of time and were significantly impacted from staffing shortages and scared patients, and also just not understanding if you could actually open. So what happened? Well, the government passed relief, and some of us on this call, and I think that this falls more on a risk appetite. Have you taken lending in the past? Do you have a line of credit on your office? Are you familiar with debt? And I found that across the board for my healthcare practitioners that I work with, there's a range. And some people have owned their house they purchased with cash, and they've never leased a car, and they have no appetite for being in debt. They may only have one credit card, and they pay it immediately at the start of the month. And then on the flip side, you may have different risk appetites for debt that will, are leveraged to the hilt. And perhaps that's a smart way to go. Perhaps the flip side is a smart way to go. I'm not here to judge, but either way, there was an interesting offer that the government gave us, and they said, look, we understand what's happening right now, and we're going to give you money that if you use it a certain way to incentivize your staff to come back, that we'll forgive. And that was a Paycheck Protection Program that was passed. And from the state's perspective, it was either coming out of unemployment benefit that was being paid out, or out of this loan construct that they set up. So many of us received this money, our firm included. So now what? Now it's time for us to start working towards forgiveness. And I think what's important about what we're going to go through today, even though you may find it absolutely mind-numbingly boring, is that it's really important as a practice owner to understand and to help prepare, because your accountant and bookkeeper can't be responsible for everything here. There has to be a level of understanding on what's happening. So what we're going to talk about is the application for forgiveness, what you should expect from your bank. You may have received instruction already from your bank, and go over some of the nuances of some of the questions that are going to come up. And then after that, I want to spend some time on employee benefits and leave, because there's a lot of different statutes at the federal and state level. We'll go through a few of them that your employees can now take advantage of and go out on leave. And so I want to talk about job protection, how long you have to hold a position for, and how long they're allowed to be out, and when they have to come back, and when you can have a doctor's note, when you can't, and some of the new stuff that's come into play. And I imagine that most of the questions at the end, which I'm happy to take, may be on the staffing issues, which is absolutely fine. I'm happy to answer what I can in the time we have allotted tonight. So I'd like to finish up a little bit before 8 if possible. And if you have any questions after that, you can always email me. I'm happy to be here as a resource to the community. So for those of you I haven't met, that's me. I have this not on slideshow, but I'll put it there now because I'm going to go use some other sites. But that's me all done up. I'm not going to say that I represent to you that I've been dressing in such a manner since March, but doing what I can. And as Dr. Giller mentioned, I am the managing partner of our healthcare department at Kirschenbaum & Kirschenbaum. I have entered into a somewhat interesting role the last couple of years, in addition to representing my smaller practices with individual owners and a few partners and this and that. I've also had a taste for what's going on with the management companies and DSOs. And it's a very interesting time right now to be a dentist and to see how the world is changing a little bit with information and technology, and artificial intelligence is coming into play. And it's a scary time for some, interesting for others. And I'm here for you as a resource as you need. You can always call me with questions. You're never going to be charged on an initial inquiry. we would, just like a patient treatment plan, I would take a look at what you have going on, and if you need real work from me, then we would lay out what that's going to look like. So you can always call me with any questions and not expect a bill on that initial call when we can figure out what's happening. So always feel free to call. So for the Paycheck Protection Program, what I wanted to do, which I think makes this a little bit messier, but I just wanted to take you to show you that this is the main page. It's very easy to get to. You can just type into a browser Paycheck Protection Program and maybe add Treasury to it. And this is the main page. This is the U.S. Department of the Treasury, so our tax dollars at work, very sophisticated websites that the government has now. And there's all kinds of information here that you can find on the Paycheck Protection Program. You can even, if you want to get scholarly, maybe you're inspired by some of the confirmation hearings you've seen and this and that, you can read some of the law. It's good for nighttime reading, I can assure you that. I never make it through many pages when I start after 11. But okay, so there it is. And I can show you a few things on there before we go back to the slides. This is the PPP Loan Forgiveness application. And there's going to be a different application if you accepted less than $50,000. Actually, this is it. So let me see. This is the one, only the borrower receives less. So this is a $50,000 one. This one's a little bit more abridged. The other one, where it's 50 and over, is similar. It's not much more complicated than this form. It's an extra couple of pages, but you can see if you took less than 50,000, they're not interested in causing you much of a hard time. They may ask for some additional information, but they want to understand, are you going to certify that the money was used for what it was supposed to be used for? Was it used for payroll costs up to at least 60% of what you're looking for forgiven? Was it used in the correct covered period, which was, remember, it started at 8 weeks, but then it went to 24 weeks when there was an additional law that was passed. And we're going to go through some of these things in the FAQs and the materials I presented. So I wanted to show you that this is the application. If you haven't received it yet, you can get it right online, right from this page. All right. And these are some more complicated materials that are here on affiliation. This is for much larger practices that possibly have investors, so DSOs, and it talks about how they would be looked at basically as a consolidated or conglomerate type construct, and possibly have some issues qualifying for forgiveness. And so that's an interesting assessment if you have to do it on the size of your organization. So I just wanted to highlight that, you know, the information, the main purpose of me showing you this is that the information for the PPP is very accessible and in user-friendly format. A lot of what we're going to go through today is actually from the frequently asked questions on loan forgiveness, which is right here on this website. You just scroll down a little bit under the program rules and you can click on it right here, and it'll answer a lot of the questions you may have. So going through some of that material, which is what I want to do today, is the PPP Forgiveness Timeline. You have 10 months from the end of your covered period to apply for forgiveness, and we'll get to what that means. You are not required to make any payments until the forgiveness amount is paid by your bank to the SBA. So it's interesting because your bank is required to front the money for you, and then you would be paying them back. If the loan is fully forgiven, then you have no responsibility for any payments. If only a portion of the loan is forgiven, or if the forgiveness application is denied, any remaining balance due on the loan must be repaid by the borrower on or before the maturity date of the loan. Now, if you remember, you may or may not recall, you actually signed a promissory note for this loan. It's a non-recourse note, which means that for the PPP funds to get it, you did not have to sign personally, you did not have to mortgage your house, did not have to promise a firstborn, but you did have to sign and allow for a security interest on the business. So there is some bite to it if you don't pay. Interest is going to accrue during the time between the time you got the money and the forgiveness, SBA remittance of the forgiveness amount. So to the extent that anything is not forgiven, the interest rate that you agreed to, which probably was around 1%, is going to kick in. You are responsible for paying the accrued interest on any amount of the loan that is not forgiven. So you will have interest on any portions that are not forgiven, which I think that you probably understood when you took it. The lender is responsible, so that means your bank, for notifying you of any time an amount is due to be paid off and the date on which your first payment is due. So this is the time to kind of, again, figure out, how do you communicate with your bank? Is everything on email? Maybe stop auto-deleting emails from your bank. If you get statements in the mail that you generally don't look at and you just throw out, let's start opening the mail around this time, because there's going to be a lot of information on loan forgiveness. Also, you may want to mention to the front desk people or whoever it is who's administering the mail to just make sure that these things get elevated to you, because I think it's very easy for these types of materials to kind of fly under the radar. And also, you should be in contact. If you haven't already, please send your bank representative an email and let them know that you are interested in seeking forgiveness for your loan. We'd like them to personally reach out to you and give you more information if you haven't already done that. So the forgiveness application, on the top of it, if you look at it, don't get aggravated. It does display an expiration date of October 31st. So is October 31st the deadline for you to apply for forgiveness? No. You can submit a loan forgiveness application at any time before the maturity date of the loan, which is either 2 or 5 years from the loan origination. So depending on what you signed, most of you probably signed a 2-year commitment, so you can apply for forgiveness at any time. However, if you do not apply for a loan forgiveness within 10 months after the last date of your loan forgiveness period, loan payments are no longer deferred, and you must begin making payments on the loan. So it doesn't make any sense to delay. The benefit that you are allowed to receive for the loan, the period will have elapsed. Okay, so there's no reason not to apply now. So if your covered period ends on October 30th, 2020, you have until August 31st, because that's going to be 10 months from when your period of time you had to use the loan is up. Okay, so this is just the link for where the information is from. Interest. Let's talk about interest here. Interest is going to accrue during the time between the disbursement of the loan and when SBA tells the forgiveness amount. The borrower is responsible for paying the accrued interest on any amount of the loan that is not forgiven. Right? And your loan should be forgiven if you adhere to the rules, which we're going to go through. And many of you, I know, had questions on, but were answered hopefully at the time that you used the loan. And it's important that we have documentation to show that we did comply, which is why we're talking about this now. As I'm talking on points relevant to forgiveness, you should be making notes and thinking about what paperwork do you need to have ready. And we can go back to the application in a minute if you'd like and walk through that, or you can let me know at the end if you want to walk through some of that more granular information. If a borrower does not apply for loan forgiveness within 10 months after the last day of the borrower's loan forgiveness covered period, loan payments are no longer deferred and you have to start making payments. Some of these are repetitive because I want to make sure that they sink in. The lender is responsible for notifying you of when you have to start paying. So if you do have to start paying, your bank has to tell you, okay? So employee compensation, let's talk about how you're going to be looking at what you paid out from the PPP funds to make sure that you properly took advantage, number one, and number two, that it was documented appropriately. And I want to go through this. So the cash compensation that you were allowed to have paid is the sum of all gross salary, gross wages, gross tips, gross commissions, paid leave, allowances for dismissal or separation payment, so severance payment, during your covered period. For each individual employee, the total amount of cash compensation eligible for forgiveness may not exceed an annual salary of $100,000. You've heard this before. So as prorated for the covered period, your covered period was either an 8-week period, if you received your loan before, I believe it was June 5th, then that total amount is $15,385. For your employees, this is employee only, for owners we'll get to it. For a 24-week cover period, you were allowed to pay out up to $46,154 on the annual basis over the 24-week period. And that's inclusive of all gross salary, okay, everything, paid leave, everything else, severance. It can only include compensation of employees who were employed at any point during the covered period and who live in the United States. Okay. Are payroll costs that were incurred during the covered period but paid after the covered period eligible for forgiveness? So this is about when your payroll falls. And your accountant or bookkeeper or you who's tabulating this are going to have these questions. Yes, if the money is paid during the next regular payroll, but you're looking at the 8-week or 24-week period that you were trying to capture, even if it's paid out in the next week, because that's when you run payroll, yes, it's okay, it's going to be covered. Are payroll costs that were incurred before the covered period but paid during the covered period eligible for loan forgiveness? Yes, they're giving that one to us too. That's going to be covered also. Are borrowers required to calculate payroll costs for partial pay periods? Yes, you are going to have to sit down and look at which weeks you are trying to capture for your covered period and match up. Do the payroll costs correspond? When was the payroll made? What periods of time specifically am I looking to capture for the forgiveness? And you're going to have your payroll records ready to be delivered and be able to explain why you included this payment or that payment. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so this is covered for borrower and no later than December 31st. For purposes of calculating cash compensation, should borrowers use the gross amount before deductions for taxes? Yes, the answer is you're using the gross amount for compensation. So that makes sense. They're looking to make sure that no one is going to try to cut corners and try to have paid, post FICA in the amount for the $100,000. It's got to be gross amount used when you're calculating. Are only salaries or wages covered by loan forgiveness, or can you pay for bonuses, incentive pay? Payroll costs include all forms of cash compensation, including bonuses or severance. Note that forgivable cash compensation per employee, again, is limited in the gross amount, of $100,000 on an annualized basis. How do borrowers calculate the reduction in their loan forgiveness amount arising from the reduction in employee salary or hourly wage? So we just weren't open enough to have everybody working full time. How do we deal with that? Certain pay reductions during the 8 or 24-week period, whatever you're using, may reduce the amount of loan forgiveness you can receive. So if your records are going to show the salary or wage of a covered employee of your front desk staff or your office manager is reduced by more than 25% during your 8 or 24-week period, the portion in excess of the 25% reduction is going to be taken out of what is allowable to be forgiven. So you are going to have to look at these types of deductions and make sure that you're paying in an appropriate amount. It's going to reduce the forgiveness amount. Benefits frequently asked questions. What expenses for group health care benefits will be considered payroll costs that are eligible for loan forgiveness? Employer expenses only, not any type of amounts that employees may have added on. Payroll costs do not include expenses paid by the employees. Only employer contribution only. And I think they did a good job of highlighting this point when they rolled out the program, because this was very clear at the start of the spring. Similarly, for retirement benefits, you will get credit for loan forgiveness for employer contribution only, not for any amounts contributed by employees, because they consider that to be a double dip. Owner compensation, which is what we are fixed on, and we want to make sure we understand and we get right. This is money that you were allowed to take out for yourself over your 24 or 8-week period, whichever one you used. So owner compensation is capped at $20,833, the 2.5-month equivalent of the $100,000 per year gross. Now, for the 8-week, the cap is going to be $15,385. And that's it. Those are the numbers. So when you look at what you've taken out, what are you allowed to have forgiven and keep from the government? That's how much. Payroll costs are considered paid on the day the paychecks are distributed or the borrower originates an ACH credit transaction. So you have to stay within the period of the covered period that's applicable for you in order to get credit. Payroll costs are considered incurred on the day that the employee's pay is earned. Payroll costs incurred but not paid during the borrower's last pay period are eligible for forgiveness if paid in the next payroll. So it's the same conversation. The next payroll is going to count and you can get it forgiven. The total amount of cash compensation eligible for forgiveness may not exceed an annual salary of $100,000 gross, prorated for the covered period, with the cap for the 24-week period at the $20,833. Non-payroll costs eligible for forgiveness for an owner include covered mortgage obligations for real property, rent obligations for real property or personal property in force before February 15th, 2020, utility payments, all kinds, electricity, gas, water, and all this stuff has to not exceed 40% of the total forgiveness amount for the non-payroll costs, which I think everyone knows. So you're allowed to use 60% of the money you received for payroll costs. 40% of the money that you received, you were allowed to use for non-payroll costs. Now, you're going to have to document the use of these funds. Your documentation is actually more complete if you receive more than $50,000 in your loan. You still have to have records to support if you're 50,000 and below, but the level of scrutiny is going to depend on which bank you went with, which is presumably your bank. But it's going to vary depending on your bank and how much money you got. Hopefully there won't be I think there will be a lot of auditing on this program, but we'll see. So in the employer comp cap, how is the amount of owner compensation that is eligible for loan forgiveness determined? The amount of loan forgiveness requested for owner employee and self-employed individuals' payroll compensation is capped at $20,833 per individual in total across all businesses. So if you own a piece of multiple practices or different companies even, you are going to be capped at this amount across the board. For an S corporation, which many of us are structured as, because there's a different treatment, and you have to speak to your accountant about this in more depth, but there are examples at the Treasury website of S Corps, C Corps, if anyone's organized as a C Corp, good luck, LLCs, however you're organized, your accountant should tag in and take a look at these distinctions if they have not looked at the Treasury guidelines. And the answer to that, by the way, is many of your accountants may not have reviewed the Treasury guidelines. So if you want to email me after this, I'm happy to send you over these links. And if you need to send them to your accountant and say, look, does any of this change, your assessment for me on what has to happen? I wouldn't say that's a bad idea. So for S corporations, the owner is eligible for loan forgiveness up to the amount of 2.5 times divided by 12 of their 2019 employee cash compensation. And this is specific language from the Treasury website, including your employer, state, and local taxes paid by you and assessed on your compensation and for your retirement funds. It differs, again, the interpretation by entity structure. which can make it very complicated. So I'm not expecting any of us to leave this discussion with a CPA behind our names. However, I think it's very important for you to have oversight in a way that you have an understanding on what we're looking at for the forgiveness construct. And also, some of you, knock on wood, may be subject to an audit by the government, because they will be concerned at some point on how their money was spent under this program. And it's an easy way for them to hire people to deploy an army to come in and audit this program. So I think it is likely that's going to happen. The non-payroll expenses, here's some frequently asked questions on how you may have spent other money that you're looking for forgiveness. Now remember, if you don't get forgiveness on this money, right now the main penalty is that you would have to pay that low interest rate and also repay that portion of the principal. So for those of us who have some debt appetite, it's just repaying free money anyway. For those of us who have no debt appetite, that's going to sound very unpalatable because the money's already been spent. You don't want to have to go into your current bank account and pay back money that you didn't really ask for in the first place, but you took. Are non-payroll costs incurred prior to the covered period but paid during the covered period eligible for forgiveness? Yes. Eligible business mortgage interest, rent, or lease costs incurred prior to the covered period are eligible for loan forgiveness. Is interest on unsecured credit eligible for loan forgiveness? No. If you payment on your real property, that stuff, that's forgivable. But unsecured credit, meaning credit cards, are not going to be forgiven during this process. So if you took the money and paid down your business Amex card, you are not going to be able to justify that, and you would have to repay that money. Are payments made on recently renewed leases or interest payments on refinanced mortgage loans eligible? Yes. If the lease existed prior to February 15th, you can get that forgiven. Are electricity supply charges eligible for loan forgiveness if they are charged separately from electricity distribution charges? Yes, the entire electricity bill is eligible for loan forgiveness. So all of that stuff should have been paid out. And remember, there's a 40% cap there. There's a lot of rules. Qualified reduction in staffing. Are you going to be dinged if you have a reduced number of full-time equivalent employees? It depends. If you tried to rehire and they wouldn't come back, or the reason why they didn't come back is going to matter, and your documentation of that reason is going to matter. So the answer to this frequently asked question is, in calculating its loan forgiveness amount, you can exclude any reduction in FTE employees if you can document in good faith an inability to rehire the individual who were in your employ prior to February 15th, an inability to hire a similarly qualified person. So you're going to have to show you tried to hire by the end of this year. You still have time. So if you've not tried to fill the spot yet, you still have time before December 31st to put up an ad. Maybe someone responds, maybe someone doesn't. But if you're really concerned about this forgiveness period, you have to show that you made an effort. You are also required to inform the applicable state unemployment insurance office of an employee's rejected rehire offer within 30 days of the employee's rejection of the offer. Now, this was big in the spring on advice that I was giving that I think some people were really, really happy to hear because it reinforced their feelings of fairness. Why should my staff sit home while I am in the office? The other people who have come in are less safe because we are understaffed and they're not able to properly sterilize or meet and greet the patients in the way that we think is the safest. And we're at risk, or, I need them, and they're just sitting at home getting enhanced unemployment. And I think when they heard that, look, the expectation is that if the job is available and they do not have a legitimate medical need to be home, then, they need to come back to work, and your obligation is to notify the unemployment office. I think that was a bit of a relief. So now you're seeing that if you were a nice person and you thought you were a nice person and you didn't notify the unemployment office that you offered the person the job back, you may potentially be dinged for it because you didn't fill the spot. So you may have missed this 30 days, but there's good faith operating, and we can talk about this offline if we have to, if you missed some of these time frames. The documents that borrowers should maintain to show compliance with this exemption includes written offer to rehire the individual, a written record of the offer's rejection, and a written record of efforts to hire a similarly qualified individual. So on this, I spoke with so many practice owners that employees just wouldn't get back to them and ghosted this and that. So I would say, look, just go back to your records, pull into a folder if you didn't already for the individual employee who didn't come back, whatever communications you did have. If it's text messages, hopefully you didn't delete them, emails, just have them collated in one area if you're looking to get credit for this person's spot that did not come back. The Edel grant reconciliation, this was really confusing because some of us applied for the $10,000 grant and then after that we got approved for the PPP after that, and it was very upsetting. We didn't know what was going to happen. Were we going to get denied for PPP? And here it turns out about $130 million approximately are remaining in that program and weren't actually called to use. So there's plenty of money left. SBA will deduct the amount of the Edel grant advance received by a PPP borrower for the forgiveness amount remitted to the lender. So you're not going to be able to double dip here. You don't get to keep the $10,000 grant plus also keep another $10,000 under the PPP. They're going to cancel each other out. How will the lender know the amount of the Edel advance? So it will be automatically deducted by SBA. If a borrower receives an Edel advance, SBA is required to reduce the loan forgiveness amount by the amount of the Edel advance. So SBA will deduct the amount from the forgiveness amount remitted. The lender will be able to confirm the amount that will be automatically deducted by SBA from the forgiveness payment by reviewing the advance information in the PPP forgiveness platform. So it's going to be automatically generated, and there we go. So I wanted to just look at this quickly. This is just what Chase has posted, and I didn't go through that many banks, but I just thought it would be good to just look at one together. I guess this didn't open for me like I was expecting. Okay, so Chase has posted on its web page a lot of information on what they expect you to prepare. Now, if you don't bank with Chase and you didn't get your loan through Chase, do not go to this website. Go check your own bank, see if TD posted something or Signature or this or that, and you'll see that they're asking you to please educate yourself before you start this process, because they are going to be asking you for payroll tax filings reported, right? They want some information that you would have given the IRS, wage reporting, unemployment insurance tax filings reported. So they're asking you to please, and they're putting a lot of information on here. They're telling you the deadline for forgiveness. They're telling you what forms they needed. And obviously they're looking to try to get ahead of this so that way all of the questions they feel that they can answer quickly, can be done in this format. Now, you may find that even the scrolling is giving you a headache, and that you don't want to have to sift through this stuff. I understand that, and perhaps you'll rely entirely on your accountant or your bookkeeper, but I think you'll be better served to have a little bit of understanding, and especially if your bank is going to put something together that's pretty simple. All these, they've kept is the share of FICA paid by an employer and eligible payroll costs. No, I think they went out of their way to make this, fairly understandable. They've written it in much more layman's terms than I would say that the law is generated. So thank you to JP Morgan Chase. I'm not endorsed by them, so this is not, I don't have to give much more of a disclaimer there, I don't think. Okay, that's what I wanted to cover for those of you that are still listening on the PPP. And now I want to go to employee leave benefits, which is going to be equally heavy in language, and then we can get to some questions that everybody has for our last couple of minutes. So Families First Act was passed in the spring, and it was meant to give relief to employees that are sick with COVID or actively seeking a diagnosis of COVID-19. And it for our practices that have less than 50 employees, and we're all essential workers, we are exempted from a certain portion. Well, we are exempted from this if we can justify the essential nature of the employee's work. So what this gave was 2 weeks of PTO at the regular rate of pay for an individual who was sick with COVID or actively seeking a medical diagnosis. This was not for someone who had anxiety about it or just felt that they were high risk. It was someone who actually had COVID. So it's interesting, even at that time, we felt that it was the 2 weeks that was necessary. So 2 weeks up to 80 hours of PTO at 2/3 of the employee's regular rate of pay if you're unable to work because you're caring for somebody else that had COVID, a child under 18 years of age. This was the law that came down federal that all states had to comply with. And in addition, the Act provided that a covered employer must provide to employees that is employed for at least 30 days an additional 10 weeks of expanded family medical leave. And for employers that were not able to adhere to this, that were under 50, they were allowed to seek an exception or opt out. This is for caregivers for individuals, kids who were home and not able to go to school. You had to pay them 2/3 minimum wage. So very large corporations. I have a friend at Verizon, and she's in HR, and a lot of people there were taking advantage of it, and they had to pay this money out. Now they were entitled to this money back they are entitled to it back as a tax credit, I believe, at the end of this year. So it's not completely out of pocket for them, but you need to be big enough to sustain and then be able to recoup the investment in the employees over time. And of course, many of us in our practices at our size, this would have crippled operations had you had a couple of people out and under this. So the legislatures did acknowledge that burden and allow for the exception as needed. Now, you're required to post this notice. I'm not sure if you already did it, but hopefully, because it was required as of the spring, another DOL notice that has to go up in the kitchen. Now, the CDC policies on return to work. Many of you actually, I think, have our roadmap to return, which we drafted for you, I believe, sometime in April. And this was set by the CDC on recommended on what you should do with an employee who has COVID. There can be a test-based resolution of fever without the use of fever-reducing medication, and improvement in respiratory systems and negative results of a molecular assay, I don't know if I'm saying that right, for COVID-19 from at least 2 consecutive nasal swab specimens. Now, here we have a lot more tests available than when CDC first took this out. So I may have to update this sometime soon because they may have new rules on the testing. And this is for employees of healthcare workers only. This is not for your brother-in-law who maybe owns a shoe store. This is just for essential employees doing essential work. A non-test-based resolution, the CDC felt that it was appropriate to say at least 3 days have passed since recovery, resolution of fever without use of fever-reducing medications, and improvement in respiratory symptoms. At least 7 days have passed since symptoms first appeared. This is what they said. And again, this is for when your staff can return to work, not when anyone can return to work. This is for essential employees. So now I know that General Society is adapting to this a bit. I know that my son has a runny nose today, and school said he's home until we have a negative nasal swab test, even though my husband went with him today and had a negative rapid test. That wasn't enough, and my son can't get the rapid test. So now we are waiting on a full, the nasal swab one. So we're going to see, as the testing evolves, these metrics are going to change also. The travel restriction. How does the travel restriction affect my staff? And some of you may have a question for me later on. Can I tell my employees they can't travel out of state because I don't want them to have to quarantine? Well, for your staff, for healthcare people, essential workers, anyone who has traveled to a designated state will be required to quarantine. However, if you have essential workers, they can come back if they meet all of the following metrics. Otherwise, they have to stay home for 14 days. This is from New York State, and there's the link at the bottom on where it's from. If you would result in staff shortages that would adversely affect your operation, they can come in as long as they're asymptomatic, they received a diagnostic test within 24 hours of arrival in New York, they've been self-monitoring twice a day on temperature checks, wearing a face mask while working. The healthcare worker should preferentially be assigned to patients at lower risk, so you have to be careful on who they're going to. They should be allowed to work under these conditions should they maintain self-quarantine when not at work, so they can't also be running around. At any time the healthcare worker, under the conditions, develops symptoms, they should immediately stop work and isolate at home. And then we can go back to this other slide on when they can come back. Resolution and then negative testing, or if it's non-test-based resolution, at least 3 days since recovery of all, and at least 7 days have passed since symptoms first appeared. So those are the rules that are in. The New York State sick leave law is new and fabulous for your employees, that is. Beginning October 1st, which just passed under the law, employees began accruing benefits they can start using on January 1st, 2021. If you have fewer than 4 employees, you're going to be required as of January 1st to start giving 40 hours of unpaid leave. That's going to roll over. It's not going to accrue more than 40. There's going to be a cap, but 40 hours every year of unpaid leave. The employers with more than 44 employees, less than 99, must provide 40 hours of paid sick leave. Paid sick leave. So if you have a policy that you were to give 2 weeks vacation, on top of the 2 weeks vacation, you now have to give 40 hours, or presumably around 1 week for your full-time staff of additional paid sick leave. So you may have to revisit your employee manual or your paid leave policy, because now you may want your sick leave policy to be inclusive. You may just want to have a paid leave section, not a vacation section, and then maybe you had no sick day leave. So you want to look at that, because what you have on file that you wrote forever ago or is on a napkin somewhere and the employees abide by it might have to be revisited now. Employers with over 100, they have to give 56 hours of paid leave. Now, this time is on an accrual basis. So if your accountant does your payroll, or if you use ADP for payroll, whoever, they're going to have to accrue it at 1 hour per 30 hours worked. Again, the leave is going to carry over to the next year, and it's going to be capped at the time allotted. Leave cannot be conditioned on a doctor's note, which is scary, because as some of us have experienced in the past, employees lie about leave time and need. So what happens if we catch Stephen, one of our front desk staff, on Facebook at the beach on a paid sick leave day? That can be grounds for termination. So we can still act on an inappropriate use, but we are now limited to requiring documentation prior to use, which perhaps you were asking for previously. New York paid family leave. This went into effect last year. If I'm getting my years right, this year has been very long. Employees have job protection now. This used to be only for FMLA 50-plus employees. Now, any employer is required to give or allow employees to take New York paid family leave. Now, you're not paying for that out of your pocket. It's funded through the employee's payroll deductions, but they are now allowed to take their time for providing care to a family member with serious health condition, for a baby, a qualifying exigency as interpreted, I don't know what that means, and for COVID-19 related illness for yourself and a family member. They can take up to 10 weeks out, and you are not allowed to replace them. You have to have their job, their title, their salary, their hours, substantially the same position available for them when they return. You also can tack on an extra 2 weeks for quarantine time if you can't get around that for the COVID sickness. So they're up to 12 weeks now protected job. And it just, so you know, what it pays, again, this is not you paying it, this is coming out of the state fund, pays 60% of the weekly wage. Now, capped is 60% of the statewide average weekly wage. So the important thing with a New York paid family leave is the job protection, that the employee can go out and you have to hold the job, because that may hurt you in a way where you are not paying for that time, but you can't replace the person because you could have a problem when they return firing. So the best way to prepare for an individual going out on your paid family leave, now they have to notice the state they intend to make a claim well before they plan on leaving, and they have to get that process set up, which is on the employee. So they should be communicating with you as HR and helping them, you know, prepare for their claims. You'll know when they're going. It is an absolute mistake to not document in writing with the employee the day that they are leaving, or actually leave. If it's a pregnancy, let's say, you know, she may not know when she's actually going out, or if it's a male that's looking to take time to bond with a newer baby, he may not know when he's departing. But on the date that he or she is leaving the employee to start the leave, you have to document the date you expect them to return. Okay, and you can confirm with the state also on the day that the leave is scheduled to be over. If the employee does not come back on that date, then you have it documented and the job protection has expired. So you have freedom then to, you know, not be bound by the employee, because that wouldn't be fair, right? So short-term disability, just to go through it really quick, you know, we all have to participate in paying into disability insurance to protect employees for off-the-job injury or illness. The cash-only benefit, which is 50% of average weekly wage, so you can see it's a little bit less than the paid family leave. The employer is permitted to take contributions from employees to offset the cost of disability, so we all take it, they all contribute. To qualify, you must be under the care of a healthcare provider. So here we absolutely have to have a doctor ordering the disability. You cannot collect disability benefits and paid family leave at the same time. The employee has to choose which to collect. And there's under no circumstance can an employee receive more than 26 weeks of combined benefit under disability and paid family leave in a 1-year period. So what does that mean? Who's watching that? Well, the state's watching that. If the employee tries, this would be on the employee, not necessarily you. If you knew an employee was trying to con the system using different last names and, you know, shenanigans, you would be absolutely within your right to report because this is a fraud against the state. An employee who engages in work for profit while disabled is not eligible to receive disability benefits. So again, an employee is out on disability from your job and you catch them on Facebook that they're now an Uber driver, that's fraud. So, and you can certainly look to see if you want to, you know, address that and report them to the state. So we've covered a lot of information. I hope that that you that you didn't think it was too much content. I think it probably was, so I apologize for that. But I'm happy to take questions now and go over scenarios that you face in your practices. So let's see if we can do that.